Hello, I'm Amanda Moore. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse Community. Welcome to the Advocacy Exchange for March 2017. The Advocacy Exchange is our monthly conversation with advocates advancing change. Both the Clearinghouse Community and the Advocacy Exchange are brought to you by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a national leader in advancing justice and opportunity. I'm happy to have with me today Elena Foshay. Elena is the Community Energy Program Manager at the Center for Energy and Environment, and she's joining us today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hi, Elena. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity.
So Elena is the author of this month's Clearinghouse article. It's called Green Jobs, Myth or Pathway Out of Poverty. You can find a copy of her article on the Clearinghouse Community. That's at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And we're going to use her article as a starting point for our conversation today on green jobs and equitable workforce development. But before we get started, I want to go ahead and tell you how you can be part of our conversation. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to send us your questions or any experiences that you've had with green jobs and this type of workforce development. There are a couple ways that you can let us hear from you. Most of you are probably watching on a laptop or a desktop through YouTube Live. And if you do, you'll see that to the right of your screen there is a live chat box. I went ahead and posted a message there to you. Feel free to send us questions that way. If you want to go ahead and test it out, feel free. You can just send us your name and where you're watching, and we would love to hear from you. If live chat's not exactly your jam, you can email me. You can email me at Amanda Moore, Moore, at povertylaw.org. And I'll also be watching my email, so feel free to send questions or comments that way as well. And I do want to thank those of you who have tuned in today. I know that we're up against the actual tip-off of the start of March Madness, so I appreciate those of you who've sort of tamped down your inner jock to be with us today. And I'm just going to assume you don't have another screen on with basketball games on over it. Elena and I were talking beforehand that I'm from Kentucky originally, and it's kind of like a national holiday for us. So anyway, thank you for being with us today. Everyone who registered for today's event will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days. And in that email, you will have a link to watch a recording of today's broadcast, and also a link to Elena's article. There will also be a place where you can register for next month's Advocacy Exchange. Oh, I see we have someone who is writing in, someone from Sacramento. Want to say hello and thanks for joining us. Let's get started, Elena, talking about green jobs. Let's start with the basics. So if you could just quickly, to make sure we're all on the same page, could you tell us what we mean when we talk about green jobs and why they're important?
Sure. So there's a couple different ways to think about green jobs. There's the sort of the definition, the official definition that comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics it breaks down green jobs into two categories. Jobs that produce goods and services that directly benefit the environment. So that might be, a solar installer or a wind turbine manufacturer, or, an electric car manufacturer. But then there's also jobs where workers' duties just involve things that make processes more sustainable or incorporate more sustainable technologies. So that might be, a manager at a business who part of their job is, figuring out sustainable suppliers for their paper or whatever. So that's sort of the official definition. There are, at the last count, which was in 2011, which was the last time the Department of Labor did an official count of green jobs, it was 3.4 million across the nation, which accounts for about 2.5% of national employment. The Department of Energy did a more recent study that showed about 2.7 million workers directly involved in the green economy. So either way, it's a pretty substantial number of people. There's also many more jobs that interact with the green economy and green technologies. Some of them are traditional jobs that are becoming more important in the fight for climate change, like bus drivers, public transit operators, wastewater treatment engineers. And then there's other new jobs as new technologies come online. So no matter what, important part of the economy.
So you wrote about this topic for us before. Back in 2010, we had a special issue of the Clearinghouse Review that was devoted to climate change and poverty issues. And the article that you wrote at that time was called "An Industry at the Crossroads, Creating Quality Green-Collar Jobs in Energy Efficiency." And you focused a lot of that article on something that was new at the time. That was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Of course, that was the big stimulus that came out after, I guess, as a result of the Great Recession. And I want to ask you about that because you did devote a lot of that article to it. So did the act deliver on its potential to create green jobs?
The Recovery Act had a huge impact on the green economy. It included about $92 billion of investment in clean energy, and that was spread across a number of different programs. Some of them at the federal level. A lot of money was pushed out to the state and local level and really hit the ground and created jobs. So, the overall net impact of the Recovery Act, based on the different analysis after it sunsetted, showed a net positive impact. 8.4 million jobs, says the Congressional Budget Office at the end of it all. There was an estimate that around 224,000 green jobs were directly created by the clean energy investments in the Act. Of course, there were many more jobs that sort of resulted. There's like a ripple effect from that investment. So many more jobs, either were created or retained by that money. There was also a $500 million investment in green workforce development that went out through the Department of Labor, and some specific $150 million that went out towards pathways out of poverty training programs. So that had a really important impact on the whole workforce development industry. It supported existing programs in adding green skills to their training. It helped with the development of new training programs, and it really opened up a lot of opportunities for training for low-income individuals and adults with barriers to employment. All of that said, there's still people that are being left out of the recovery. There's people, the economy is in much better shape. In states like Minnesota, there's actually more jobs than people available to work. So that's pretty exciting by the numbers, but that there also are still much higher unemployment rates among African Americans and Latinos. Racial wealth gap is widened. There's people that are still being left out of the recovery.
And that's really what your current article gets at, I think, is how could these policy programs be better tailored, better targeted, to make sure that people who do need the economic boost or who are affected most by climate change are getting the benefits of these programs. So we're going to talk about that. Your article recommends 6 concrete actions, some concrete policy actions that could do just that could boost the creation of green jobs in an equitable way. I don't know if we're going to have time to get through all 6 of them in the time we have together today, but I do want to make sure that we talk about a few of them in detail. One of those actions is to make sure that clean energy investments specifically benefit those communities that will be hardest hit by climate change. What communities do you mean by that? Because I think a lot of times when we think about this, we think about maybe, islands in the South Pacific or something that are directly affected by rising sea level. So I guess there's some coastal areas of the United States, but is there a broader group of people that you're talking about in the United States when we talk about communities directly affected by climate change?
Yeah, so there's been some really great work on this topic. There's been some good research identifying which communities and which groups of people are going to suffer the most. So, for example, I think Hurricane Katrina is the most obvious example. The neighborhoods that suffered the worst flooding and the worst impacts were the lowest income. The lower Ninth Ward, which was a largely African American neighborhood, low income. Still hasn't recovered completely. Every time there's a record heat wave, low-income people are the ones that don't have air conditioning, and so there's some real health risks there. This winter, the Pacific Northwest has had record snow. Schools have been closed a whole bunch. Every time schools are closed, somebody has to stay home with the kids. If you're a low-wage worker, that means you're losing wages for those days. And then on a more regulatory scale, California created something called Cal Enviro Screen, which actually, is sort of, it analyzes a bunch of data and identifies neighborhoods throughout the state and sort of sections of communities throughout the state that are suffering higher levels of air pollution, and other similar, but particulate matter in the atmosphere, things like that, that affect, health and well-being and heat, increase the heat index and things like that. So that will only get worse as air quality declines. So those are the kinds of communities that I'm talking about when I talk about who will be more impacted by climate change.
And I want to drill into that just a little bit more. Is there a racial justice angle to this as well?
Absolutely. The neighborhoods that'll be hardest hit are generally low income. Low income neighborhoods tend to be located next to highways or shipping ports or oil refineries, or things that there's a clear environmental justice. This is all what the environmental justice movement is all about. Those neighborhoods tend to be more racially diverse, higher numbers of African Americans and Latinos, higher numbers of people without the resources to protect themselves.
Right, and we on that point, we had a question that came in before the broadcast that was asking about, as we look at creating these jobs, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, and how to get people into the workforce, how that works with the history of racism that's been present in some of the building trades or some unions. And I know we've had some discussion about this with the person who asked about that. I wonder if you could touch on that just a little bit here as well.
Sure. Well, so one of the things that I talk about in this article is that union jobs, that the green economy, construction jobs are a very important part of the green economy. And so growing the number of green jobs means growing the number of construction jobs. Now, union construction jobs are accessible to people without a college education, and they pay good wages and provide benefits. They're career track jobs. So this opens up a good opportunity for folks who need access to solid employment pathways. That said, yeah, it was a point that needs to be recognized, that there is a history of racism among many building trades unions, and that varies across the country. There's some unions that are very diverse, and different regions of the country, different parts of the country are different. So definitely want to recognize that. But there's a real opportunity. Building trades unions are experiencing incredible turnover right now with retirements. The baby boomers are all getting ready to retire. They've all been working in their trade for 30, 40 years. And so they're really kind of desperate for new members right now, and that's just going to get worse. So that opens up an opportunity for them, for each union that's looking to expand their membership base, to invite in maybe folks who haven't been a part of that union before. And there are lots of unions around the country who are already, they're being very proactive about this. They already know about this. And so they're partnering with training programs and different organizations to try to bring in new membership that's much more diverse, bring in more women, trying to diversify their ranks in that sense. So there's a lot of proactive efforts, and then there's also sort of policy efforts to support that. And that's where I get in later in the article into targeted hiring requirements and disadvantaged business requirements that sort of support those who are doing good work around equity.
Right, that's another one of your actions that's recommended. It's to ensure access to employment opportunities through participation and targeted hiring requirements. So Elena's article does get into this in some detail. I want to remind our viewers that we would love to hear from you with your questions. We did have one question come in. And I think we can go ahead and answer this one before we get to the next action that's listed in your article. I do want to remind people you can send us a question through the live chat on YouTube Live, or you can email me at Amanda Moore, Moore, at povertylaw.org. But the question that came in is, in light of the new administration, and this kind of follows up on what you were writing about in 2010 versus circumstances today. So in light of the new administration, are there any concerns for how the green jobs economy might be affected?
So this is something that we talk about pretty much every day at work right now. It is
as all of us do, I think.
Yeah. And basically, I think that we can't count on anything at the federal level right now, and it's all gonna come down to state and local actions. And I think state and local governments are very aware of this and are being very proactive in spite of what might happen at the federal level. You know, I think the momentum that was certainly generated as a result of the Recovery Act around growing the clean energy economy can't be slowed. It's already there. You know, the economy is moving forward. The green jobs are being created. Climate change is real, and people are responding. And you know that nothing that happens at the federal level can stop that. So really, it's down to our state and local governments to take action.
I want to talk about another one of the actions that you lay out in the article. It is to address persistent barriers to employment. So this is one that really will resonate with a lot of civil legal aid attorneys or equal justice attorneys. So tell us more about the particular types of employment barriers that you're talking about and how they can be overcome.
Yeah, so this is something, you know, before I was in my current position, I managed a job training program, a green job training program for adults with barriers to employment. So this is something that I am very familiar with and helps people overcome every day on the job. A huge one is driver's license. There are 17% of California residents in one study, California adults, had a suspended license for failure to appear in court. That's a huge number of people, very disproportionately represented among African Americans, especially. And it means, you know, if you don't have a driver's license, it's really hard to get a job, especially a job like a construction job where they want you to drive the company truck or whatever. So that's a massive barrier. There's been creative efforts around the country. I know in California where I was working, they had implemented an amnesty program that allowed people with fines, you know, stacked up fines that resulted in their license being suspended. They were allowed to apply for this program and get their fines waived, or the majority of their fines waived, so they could get their license back. You know, there was also something called Homeless in Caring Court, which was an ongoing offering. You would go through kind of some case management, and as a result, the court would waive all of your fines and give your license back. So, you know, there's some great examples, and that's something that needs to continue. And also there needs to be advocacy at more of the policy level to not take people's licenses away in the first place just for being poor. There's also
one barrier that I know our readers run into a lot with their clients is with reentry issues and criminal records being a barrier to employment as well.
Yeah, and there's the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. There's a group of people really working on this issue there, basically equating criminal background checks to discrimination, specifically because of the number of people of color who have a criminal background. And often it's for an offense that is old, has nothing to do with the job at hand that they're applying for. You know, sometimes there's lots of evidence that criminal background reports are inaccurate or have incorrect information. And so really, you know, the work is partly at the policy level, like President Obama tried to implement the ban the box policy on federally funded projects, but there's also work directly with employers to help raise their awareness that a criminal background doesn't necessarily say anything about the quality of person they're going to hire. And I know the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in the Bay Area is doing a lot of work around that. And there's some good examples of direct advocacy with employers.
Let's move on to another one of the actions that you recommend, which is adequately preparing disadvantaged populations for success in the clean energy workforce. So I know this is so important in any type of workforce development program. Can you talk a little bit about how this works in reality?
Yeah, sure. So In the article, I talk a lot about union jobs. Like I said, as a good pathway to quality employment. It's hard to get into apprenticeship programs. It really is. College, community college even, is inaccessible to a lot of people. They either can't afford the tuition or can't afford the time not working that it would take to get a college degree. So apprenticeships are a great opportunity because you start working and learning at the same time. You get to earn a wage from day one. But apprenticeships are really challenging to get into for a lot of low-income folks and adults with barriers. So pre-apprenticeship programs play an important role in bridging that gap. They're programs that combine some technical skills training with case management and employment placement support. But there's no national standard for those programs. So one of the things I talk about is the multi-craft core curriculum, which is a pre-apprenticeship curriculum developed by the National Building Trades Council that tries to apply some standards to the technical and hands-on training in those programs. There's also just some best practices, making sure that employers are involved in designing the curriculum and then also offering the training, that there's opportunities for participants to directly interact with employers, either through networking events or on-the-job experience. And that there's also opportunities to earn a wage during training, because it's really difficult for low-income folks to not to go a day without earning money. Mm-hmm. And there's some more things that are highlighted in the article.
I know one of the points that you raised as far as the networking events and having employers meet with potential employees was you raised the idea of implicit bias as, sort of another barrier that people face who are trying to get a job, and that those face-to-face opportunities to meet people can help to overcome some of those biases that people are up against when applying for jobs.
In the program that I ran, we witnessed this firsthand, where there might be employers that have some assumptions and stereotypes about certain groups of people, but once they get to know folks personally on an individual level, they actually see that this individual is a hard worker, really wants to do a good job just like everybody else, and it just kind of helps to overcome some of the bias that might come in play in the hiring process. And so the more opportunities for that, the better. It's also just reality that to get a job, most people get jobs through networking. They don't get jobs through simply applying to a job posting. So the bigger you can help build a trainees network so that they have access to more job opportunities, the better off in the long term.
Well, let me talk about one or maybe two more of the actions, and then I have a question for you sort of specifically about recommendations for attorneys that I want to get to. But before that, let's talk about another of the actions that you recommend, which is to ensure that clean energy jobs are good jobs by applying wage standards, guaranteeing access to basic benefits, and enforcing worker protections. So how can we control those things?
Yeah, so, there's all kinds of climate policies out there. Lots of states have them in different forms, but not all of them were passed with an equity framework. So I give a couple of examples in the article. In California, they have a cap and trade program, carbon cap and trade program. So carbon emitters they can buy and sell basically permission to pollute, and that the amount of that permission goes down over time. But anyway, the money that's generated from that goes into a pot. And a bill was passed that said that 25% of those funds have to benefit disadvantaged communities, and disadvantaged is defined as those who are going to be hardest hit by climate change. And 10% has to be directly invested in those communities. So that was a really strong equity lens that was applied to this carbon reduction, this climate policy, statewide climate policy. New York, on the East Coast, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is another good example of a similar cap and trade program that's investing in things that are benefiting disadvantaged communities. So those are just a couple of good examples.
Well, I think we can have time to talk about your final recommendation, which is actually the first one in the article, which is to increase the overall number of jobs by continuing to invest aggressively in clean energy. Is there anything to elaborate on that point, or is it sort of kind of explain itself?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just don't give up. I know a lot of people are feeling really discouraged right now. There's a lot that can be done at the state and local level, and so focus on that. Do those things. There's energy efficiency is a huge job creator, and especially jobs that are accessible to people without a college education. And so there's lots that can be done at the state and local level to increase investment in energy efficiency. There's, aside from government funding, most states have, or a lot of states have, utility ratepayer funded energy efficiency programs. So that means everyone on their energy bill sees a 75 cents a month charge or something like that. It goes into a pot of money, which is regulated by the state Utilities Commission. But that money is spent by utilities to try to improve energy efficiency and invest in renewable energy. And so what that looks like in each state varies, but it's a really important job creator. It's a really important way to continue to support local efforts to fight climate change.
Well, now I can get to my lawyer question. I've kept our viewers in suspense. So a lot of our viewers are kind of frontline legal aid attorneys or attorneys who may work on some policy issues. But for those people who are practicing attorneys, maybe not the policy side of things, what is the role for them in this work?
Oh, it's such an important role. I think the number one piece of advice I would give is to anyone who's a legal aid attorney is to, if you don't already, get to know your local job training programs that are serving disadvantaged adults. Get to know them and start working together with them. So that means cross referrals. So if you have clients that you're working with that are needing access to employment, refer them over to those programs. Those training programs always have people that need help clearing their criminal record or dealing with, all kinds of domestic situations, homelessness, housing issues, all kinds of stuff that attorneys work on. And so having a really good relationship with those programs will help you access clients that need your help. So I think that's probably the biggest one. Otherwise, advocating at the state and local level for programs that address driver's license, suspensions, criminal backgrounds, discrimination, housing issues. Housing is such another huge barrier to employment. So yeah, continuing to work on those efforts. And any opportunities to work on the employer side as well, because it's not just work on the worker side, it's the employer side that needs to be addressed too at the same time.
Well, Elena, thank you so much for being with us today. I've really enjoyed this topic and the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure. And I want to remind our viewers that you can read Elena's article for more detail on all these. She has some great citations in there and some statistics as well. That article is called Green Jobs, Myth or Pathway Out of Poverty. And I'll remind you, you can find that on the Clearinghouse community at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to be kept up to date of future events or articles that are published on the Clearinghouse, please join our mailing list so you can be notified of those. You can sign up at connect.povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And I'll also invite you to follow the Shriver Center on LinkedIn. I also want to extend an invitation to join us for next month's Advocacy Exchange. We'll talk about the return of time limits in SNAP. And for those of you who've joined us from the environmental side of things today, SNAP is the program that we used to refer to as food stamps. So we'll talk about the return of SNAP time limits for able-bodied adults without dependents. They're kind of inelegantly called ABODs. And the litigation that's going on around the country to make sure that states are not denying SNAP to people who should still be eligible. I'll be joined by my Shriver Center colleagues, Andrew Hammond and Mackenzie Spear, as well as Saima Akhtar from the Empire Justice Center in New York. And that will take place on Wednesday, April 19th at 1 o'clock Eastern and 10 o'clock Pacific, same time as today's broadcast. And I do hope that you will join us next month. And until then, remember that you're not alone out there. Thank you.
Thank you.